It was a disgrace to his cloth and his church. Today, nearly 4 decades on, he is being made to pay for his crimes. The former Royal Marine Commando worked at the Father Hudson's Boys' Home in the 1950s and 60s. Pictures taken at the time mask the brutal reality of life at the home. Victims claim sexual assaults and severe beatings were commonplace. Victims like Danny Mackle, who is deeply traumatized by his past. He still carries the sixpence Taylor gave him after he was abused.
It's my worth. That's what I'm worth. Sixpence, 2.5p. That's all I've got. That's all I've ever had, like, you know.
At the end of the trial, one of the jurors collapsed sobbing when the court was told that Taylor already had a conviction for abusing young boys. Eric McInnes, ITN, Warwick Crown Court.
2 brothers in their 60s were remanded in custody today, charged over the Mardi Gras bombings. Ronald and Edgar Pierce from West London were accused of firearms and blackmail offences. It follows a huge investigation into 36 attacks, mainly on Sainsbury's and Barclays banks. In the last 20 minutes, the England captain Alan Shearer has said he didn't mean to kick a Leicester player in the face during Newcastle's match last night. He said the television pictures made the incident look worse than it was. Here's our sports reporter, Peter Staunton.
The match reflected Newcastle's disappointing season. They were lucky to escape with a draw, and at the end, Alan Shearer's frustration at being marked out of the game boiled over. He was dragged down and reacted by kicking Neil Lennon in the face. The home fans were furious, and then astonished as no action was taken by the match officials. None of them had seen the incident. The Leicester manager, though, was in no doubt what had happened.
It looked very clear that I thought that Neil Lennon had been kicked in the face by Alan Shearer. I don't care. I've just said in the press room in there, I don't care whether you're Alan Shearer or whether you're the Pope. At the end of it all, the rules are rules, and if you've done that, you deserve to go.
On a visit to the club sponsors today, Newcastle manager Kenny Dalglish defended his player, saying there was no malice in the tackle. But one top referee was certain that in France this summer, Shearer would be sent off.
That would be a red card in the World Cup, particularly early on when the referees will be under pressure from FIFA to be very strong and very strict and to deal with any sign of very rough or brutal play very severely.
Shearer's version of what happened came minutes ago. He was amazed at how bad the tackle had looked. It had been a complete accident. In theory, the FA could investigate last night's incident using the video evidence, but in reality, with the World Cup looming, they'll be happy for it to be quietly forgotten. Peter Staunton, ITN Sport, Lancaster Gate.
On News at 10 with Trevor MacDonald, ITN's political editor Michael Brunson reviews Labour's first year.
Finally being punished for using the priesthood as a cloak for his years of paedophilia. Throughout his trial at Warwick Crown Court, victim after victim gave graphic evidence about how he sexually abused them and left them psychologically scarred for life. As an administrator at this Father Hudson's children's home in Coleshill near Birmingham in the late 1950s to 1965, Taylor routinely preyed on boys in his care, some as young as 6.
It was really quite matter of fact. He wanted sex. He told the donators. He saw a victim, a helpless victim, and did what he wanted. That home became his harem.
Some of the victims likened the regime to that of a concentration camp. They were known by their numbers, and anyone who dared to complain faced severe beating from nuns, some of whom were described as brutal. This evening it emerged that Taylor had convictions in 1975 for abusing young boys as a parish priest. The church said it deeply regretted any harm caused by Taylor's actions. Police officers who led the investigation said despite the decades since his offences, it was important to bring to justice a man who betrayed those in his care.
He was in a position that he could have done so much good for these children who, quite rightly, the judge described as being abandoned. He could have done so much good, but he decided not to do that. And one can only describe his actions as evil.
Warwickshire Social Services, which used to place children in the home, said 40 or 50 years ago there was a naive sense of innocence and an assumption that a priest was above reproach. They didn't believe such wholesale abuse could happen today. One of the jurors broke down in tears as Taylor was convicted on 18 of 21 counts of sexual abuse. In jailing him for 7 years, his Honour Judge Coates told him, "You are a disgrace to your cloth and the church you proclaim." Relief at last for some of Taylor's victims as he was led away to prison tonight. Tragically, there were others who committed suicide because they could no longer cope with what he'd done to them. John McIntyre, BBC News, Warwick Crown Court.
A woman has lost an appeal against her conviction for the murder of a Bradford businessman who allegedly subjected her to years of abuse. Supporters of Zura Shah have been campaigning for her release since 1993, when she was sentenced to life for poisoning Mohammed Azam with arsenic.
More than a decade after the discovery of what's become known as mad cow disease, farmers say they still cannot get accurate information about what goes into cattle feed. The National Farmers Union told the BSE inquiry that they're angry at the lack of cooperation from the feed industry. It was the recycling of dead cows and sheep which is thought to have caused the BSE epidemic.
This is the raw material that's been blamed for starting the BSE epidemic. Britain used to recycle 2 million tonnes of dead cows and sheep every year, converting them into cattle feed. Today, farmers' leaders told the BSE inquiry that during the 1960s, 70s and 80s there was no feed labelling system to warn them of what they were doing. Information that they say is still hard to get.
We are dissatisfied that we still have not got full ingredient declarations for farmers to have. It's all very good to say we can ring up and get it, or if we ask for it we'll get it, but then you don't know when they're changing it to ask again.
Representatives of the feed industry have little time for such complaints.
You don't walk into a Kentucky Fried Chicken shop and ask them for the detailed recipe, or if you do, you don't necessarily get the detailed recipe. But farmers were told what was going into the feed when they wanted to know. What the compounders were reluctant to do was to advertise to their competitors the precise formulations that they were using.
For the inquiry, it's a difficult issue to resolve. Who knew what and when could prove crucial in deciding whether or not anyone was to blame. The gradual increase in the use of recycled cow and sheep protein in cattle feed may have happened without farmers' knowledge, but the National Farmers Union admits that had they known about it, they would have approved. Its use is now banned.